The escaped Sarah Mitchell sat in her car in the long-term parking lot of Cedar Falls Regional Airport, her hands trembling on the steering wheel as she stared at the departure terminal through rain-streaked windows. At 32, she had finally found the courage to do what she should have done 5 years ago, leave her husband and the suffocating marriage that had slowly stolen her sense of self. The overnight bag in her passenger seat contained everything she had managed to pack in the 20 minutes between her husband Marcus leaving for his business trip and her panicked flight from their beautiful house that had never felt like home. Some clothes, her important documents, the small amount of cash she had managed to save by hiding money from grocery shopping, and a one-way plane ticket to Denver where her college friend Emma lived. Sarah's phone buzzed with another text from Marcus, the 20th since she had turned it back on to check her flight information. The messages had evolved from confusion to anger to threats, each one making her more certain that leaving had been the right choice, even if fear made her hands shake and her heart race. She silenced the phone and stepped out into the rain, grabbing her bag and walking toward the terminal with the determined steps of someone who knew that looking back would mean losing the courage to move forward. The wrong gate inside the terminal, Sarah's anxiety made everything feel surreal and disconnected. The crowds, the announcements, the bright lights, it all seemed overwhelming after months of isolating herself, of making herself smaller to avoid conflict, of forgetting what it felt like to navigate the world on her own terms. She found a quiet corner near her gate and waited, checking her ticket repeatedly to make sure she was in the right place. Flight 847 to Denver, departing at 6:45 p.m. from gate 23. She had 2 hours before boarding, 2 hours to sit and try to quiet the voice in her head that kept asking if she was making a terrible mistake. When boarding was announced, Sarah was so lost in her anxious thoughts that she barely registered the gate number being called. She stood in line, showed her boarding pass to the agent who scanned it without comment, and made her way down the jetway in a fog of exhaustion and emotional overload. It wasn't until she had settled into seat 4-2C and the plane began to taxi that Sarah pulled out her boarding pass to check her arrival time and felt her stomach drop. Gate 32. Her ticket said Gate 32, not Gate 23. She had boarded the wrong plane. Too late to turn back, Sarah's heart hammered in her chest as she looked around the cabin, trying to understand what had happened. How could the gate agent have let her board the wrong flight? But as she looked at her boarding pass more carefully in the dim cabin light, she realized the barcode had scanned. Probably because she had checked in properly, she had just walked to the wrong gate in her distracted state. "Excuse me," Sarah said to the flight attendant passing by. "I think I'm on the wrong plane. I was supposed to go to Denver." The flight attendant checked her boarding pass and gave her a sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry, but we've already left the gate. You'll need to contact the airline when we land to get rebooked on your original destination." "Where is this flight going?" Sarah asked, feeling panic rise in her throat. "Portland, Oregon," the flight attendant replied before moving on to help another passenger. Portland. Sarah leaned back in her seat, trying to process this development. She had no one in Portland, no plan, and barely enough money to last a week even if she found somewhere cheap to stay. The careful escape she had planned had just become significantly more complicated. The seat beside her, first time in Portland, asked a quiet voice from the seat beside her. Sarah turned to find a man in his late 30s looking at her with concern rather than the casual chattiness of typical airplane conversation. He had kind eyes and an easy manner, wearing jeans and a casual sweater that suggested comfort rather than business travel. I'm not supposed to be going to Portland," Sarah admitted, too overwhelmed to maintain the social pretense of polite small talk. "I got on the wrong plane. That's unfortunate," the man said with genuine sympathy. "Were you heading somewhere important?" Sarah felt tears threaten and blinked them back angrily. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't let the fear win. "I was trying to get to Denver, to a friend's house. She trailed off, unsure how much to share with a stranger. The man seemed to sense her hesitation and didn't push. "I'm Jake, by the way, Jake Mitchell." "Sarah," she replied automatically, then felt a small shock. "Mitchell, that's my last name, too." "Well, that's an interesting coincidence," Jake said with a slight smile. "Maybe we're distant cousins." An unexpected conversation. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Sarah found herself talking to Jake in a way she hadn't talked to anyone in years. Perhaps it was the anonymity of being strangers on a plane, or perhaps it was the fact that her carefully constructed life had just fallen apart anyway, making secrets seem pointless. She told him about her marriage, not all of it, but enough. The gradual isolation from friends and family, the criticism that had eroded her confidence, the control disguised as care. The moment she had finally realized that love shouldn't make you feel small and afraid. "I left this morning," Sarah said quietly, "while he was on a business trip. I was supposed to be starting over in Denver, And instead I'm going to Portland with nowhere to stay and barely any money because I boarded the wrong plane like an idiot. You're not an idiot? Jake said firmly. You're someone in crisis who made a small mistake. That's completely understandable. What am I going to do when we land? Sarah asked, the question she had been avoiding. Jake was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. I have a proposition, but I want you to know there are no strings attached and no expectations. I own a small tech company in Portland, and I live there with my 7-year-old daughter Emma. I also have a guest house that's currently empty. My sister used to live there but moved to Seattle last year. Sarah looked at him warily. Every warning about trusting strangers warring with her desperate need for help. Understanding hesitation. I know how this sounds, Jake said quickly. Strange man on plane offers housing to woman fleeing bad situation. All the red flags are there. But Sarah, I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. My wife died 3 years ago, and for a while after I understood what it felt like to have your life completely upended, to feel lost and uncertain about every decision. That's not the same as what I'm going through, Sarah said quietly. No, it's not. But it taught me that sometimes people need help, and sometimes the help comes from unexpected places. What I'm offering is a safe place to stay while you figure out your next steps. No rent, no obligations. Just a chance to catch your breath. Why would you do that for a stranger? Jake's expression became more serious. Because 2 years ago, my daughter Emma asked me why we had an empty guest house when people didn't have homes. I gave her all the practical reasons: insurance, liability, safety. She looked at me with these 7-year-old eyes and said, "But Daddy, if we can help someone and we don't, aren't we part of the problem?" A leap of faith. When the plane landed in Portland, Sarah had made a decision that felt simultaneously terrifying and necessary. She would accept Jake's offer, but with clear boundaries and a plan to find her own place as quickly as possible. She would also call Emma in Denver and explain what had happened, asking her to wire money if needed. Jake gave Sarah his business card and the address of his company, suggesting she research him thoroughly before making any final decisions. There's a coffee shop across from my office, he said. Meet me there tomorrow morning if you decide to take me up on the offer. If you don't show up, I'll understand, and I'll just assume you found another solution. That night, Sarah checked into the cheapest hotel she could find near the airport and used the free Wi-Fi to research Jake Mitchell. What she found was reassuring articles about his company's community initiatives, photos of him at charity events with his daughter. Nothing that suggested anything other than what he had presented himself as. More importantly, she called Emma and explained everything. Emma's response was immediate: take the offer. But I'm wiring you $1,000 anyway. You need options, Sarah. Never put yourself in a position where you have to depend on anyone again out of desperation. The guest house. The next morning, Sarah met Jake at the coffee shop, and after another long conversation where she asked every question she could think of, she accepted his offer. The guest house was small but comfortable: 1 bedroom, a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a living space with large windows overlooking a garden. The key is yours for as long as you need it, Jake said, showing her where everything was. Emma and I are in the main house if you need anything, but we'll respect your privacy. The only thing I ask is that if Emma talks to you when you're around, she's very friendly, just be kind. She's been through enough loss already. Over the following weeks, Sarah slowly began to rebuild her life. She found a job as an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, opened her own bank account, and filed for divorce through a lawyer Emma had recommended. The guest house became her sanctuary, a place where she could be herself without fear of criticism or control. Unexpected family. Emma Wellington turned out to be as curious and kind as her father had suggested. She would often appear at Sarah's door with questions, drawings to show, pressed or requests for help with homework. Gradually, Sarah found herself being drawn into their small family unit, joining them for dinners, helping Emma with school projects, and having long conversations with Jake about parenting, loss, and the challenge of starting over. You know what I realized? Jake said one evening as they sat on his back porch while Emma played in the garden. When I offered you the guest house, I thought I was doing you a favor. But Emma and I needed you as much as you needed us. How could you possibly need me? Sarah asked. Because we were stuck, Jake said simply. Emma and I had built a life that worked, but it was closed off, careful, protected. You reminded us that there's value in taking risks, in being open to new people and possibilities. The gift of wrong turn. 6 months after boarding the wrong plane, Sarah stood in Jake's living room, helping Emma wrap Christmas presents while holiday music played softly in the background. The divorce was finalized. Her ex-husband was prohibited from contacting her by court order, and she had started taking evening classes in nonprofit management at Portland State University. The guest house had become home in a way that her expensive house in Cedar Falls never had. Portland had become her city, Emma had become like a daughter to her, and Jake had become something she wasn't quite ready to define, but that felt like the beginning of genuine love built on mutual respect and understanding. Sarah, Emma said, looking up from the present she was wrapping. Are you glad you got on the wrong plane? Sarah thought about that morning 6 months ago, the panic, the fear, the feeling that her careful escape plan was falling apart. At the time, boarding the wrong plane had felt like a disaster. Now, looking around at the life she had built in Portland, at the family she had found in the most unexpected place, she realized it had been the best mistake she could have made. Yes, Emma, I'm very glad I got on the wrong plane, good, Emma said seriously. Because I'm glad too. Daddy is happier when you're around, and I like having you here. Later that evening, as Sarah walked back to the guest house with a full heart and the leftover cookies Emma had insisted she take, she thought about how life's most important moments often looked like mistakes at the time they were happening. Wrong planes led to right destinations. Strangers became family. And sometimes the bravest thing you could do was accept help when it was offered. The plane to Denver would have taken her to safety, but the plane to Portland had taken her somewhere better, to a place where she could rebuild not just her life, but her belief in the possibility of genuine connection, authentic kindness, and love that didn't make you smaller but helped you remember who you had always been meant to be. Sometimes getting lost was the only way to find your way home.